Hi everybody, welcome to part one of AI for Educators. So we're going to be focusing on teaching with AI for beginners in this evening's session. It is being recorded. I know that we'll have a mix of people who are joining live and who are watching the recording back. If you are joining us live, then like I said, the session will be recorded and it will be sent to you as soon as the session's over. You just click the same link that you used to join the call and it will take you straight to the recording once we're finished. By way of a little bit of housekeeping, just before we get into the main session, you aren't able to unmute and talk in this particular webinar environment, but you will see that there's a chat box and there's a question box. I'll be keeping an eye on both of those through the session. So if you want to put any questions in the questions or the chat, like either one works, I'll check both. If you click onto the little apps button, you'll also see that there's an option for links. So I've put a couple in there. One will take you to our instant demo, which I'll talk to you about in a second. And the other one's for an app called Suno that lets you create some AI music. It has nothing to do with what we're going to be talking about today, but it's my favourite use of AI that I've come across. So if you want to start composing personalised songs, there's a good reason to go and check out the links tray. So questions in chat, both switched on. Like I said, some people will be joining us live, some will be watching the recording. So feel free to say hello in the chat if you'd like. If you're happy to just kick back with a cup of tea and take some notes and listen along, that is absolutely fine. So we'll get started. My name is Hannah. I'm the Director of Schools at Stylus, and I'm going to be taking you through teaching with AI for beginners. So let's have a look first of all what we're actually going to cover. So I'm assuming in joining this session that you are someone who has an interest in AI, someone who probably works in education, either directly in schools or with schools, but maybe that you've not had a chance to explore it in a huge amount of detail. Maybe you've got questions that are unanswered and you're hoping to get the answers to tonight, or even that you have absolutely no idea where to start. You've heard people talking about AI and ChatGPT and you're here to find out what those things actually are. So the good news is on the agenda, we're going to try and cover a little bit of everything. So we are going to do some really basic definitions around what these terms actually mean. We're going to look at some practical applications for teachers, ways in which you can just get up and running with using AI to hopefully save you some time straight away. And we'll finish by thinking whole school. So if you are a school leader, if you're the person who's been put in charge of figuring out how you can use AI across your department or across your school this year, we will spend a little bit of time looking at where you might start. Session 2 of this series is then focused on whole school approaches and ways in which you can use AI to solve some of the problems that might come up at a whole school level. So we're going to start with some definitions. I'll sort of flag this first of all. So you might be familiar with this. This is the exam question difficulty curve with raking design. So if you've had to sit through watching students take exam papers or administer them yourself, which I'm guessing pretty much all of us on the call have done, you'll be familiar with this pattern that we start off straightforward as a warm-up to a topic and we get a little bit more difficult, and then we might get a little bit easier and then it gets a bit more difficult. So we try to build students' confidence as they progress through the paper, and that is exactly the kind of structure that we're going to try and follow this evening. So we'll look at the more sort of introductory part of what we're talking about with AI, and then we'll make it a little bit more complex for those of you who might already have some knowledge already, and then we'll go back to basics and we'll move on to new topics. And if you are interested, this is the prompt from ChatGPT-4 that was used to create the graph that you've just been looking at, and that is very much going to be the theme. How can you use AI to get things that you need and to help you save time in your school day? So what is AI and what's going on under the hood? We're going to start there. So all of the phrases that you see on the screen there might be things that you've heard referenced in conversations around AI, either specifically in school or more broadly. So NLP, AI, LLM, Gen AI, frequently dropped into conversation. We're going to start by defining them. So first of all, let's look at these big circles. We've got artificial intelligence, we've got natural language processing, and then we've got computer vision. So broadly speaking, as definitions, artificial intelligence is to do with essentially computers being able to make decisions about things. You've got natural language processing, which is to do with the ability to interpret language. That's been around for a lot longer. If you think about any time you've ever tried to get through to DHL to find out where your parcel went, or you've been on the every customer help and you've had to deal with a robot, that's thanks to natural language processing. So interpret the question and provide you with the automated response and back again. And then you've got computer vision, which is concerned with essentially computers being able to read things, so to scan and interpret text or images. So what you have when you put all of those three together sitting in the middle is what we call generative AI and large language models. So this exists at the intersection where we've got computers that are able to interpret language. They can talk to us, they can hold a conversation, we can say things to them and they can choose appropriate responses back. They're able to read and interpret things that we share with them. So we can give them information and then we can talk to them about that information, and they can make decisions. And that's been, I guess, the root of the big step forward that we've seen in AI for the last 2 or 3 years, is this ability for computers to make even more complex decisions, even quicker, at even larger scales. So NLP on the left-hand side there, that's your natural language processing, artificial intelligence. Large language models are these new models like ChatGPT that are able to converse with you almost like you are, like you're talking to a person, are able to make decisions at a much larger scale, have been trained on information that they're now able to use to give responses to prompts. And then generative AI is about being able to create things. So when we see things like image creation or AI music videos or AI songs, like the one that I've dropped in the link under apps there, that's all examples of generative AI. So it's not just computers understanding and being able to make decisions, but also being able to then create new things inspired by the information that they've been trained on. So ChatGPT sits in this very specific little subsection of that. So we had artificial intelligence, machine learning, generative AI, which is all of this creating new things, large language models, which are concerned with specifically the language side of creating things, being able to formulate a response, conversational agents, which are then taking that ability to have a conversation and presenting it in a way that you or I can sign on and talk to an AI chatbot. And then ChatGPT, which is an example of that. So ChatGPT is one example of a conversational agent, and there are many more out there. And then ChatGPT 4 is a particular, lost my word, but a particular like release of ChatGPT. We've since got GPT 4o, which is even newer. So let's then have a think about ChatGPT itself, because this is the one that is most often referenced when we're talking about AI. So it was created by a company called OpenAI for public use. And its intention is, as we said, to have conversations with the user. But you can also then access community created GPTs. So something really cool about this one, and why it's particularly well suited to teachers, is that you can use that same technology that underpins it to go and then create your own version of the GPT that does something very specific that you need it to do. So that might be image generation. It might be, you've seen lots of talk about tutor bots and people creating programs where if a student's struggling with maths, they can go and sign on and talk to an AI maths tutor. These are all examples of these custom GPTs, and we will have a look a little later on at how you might start to use that yourself. But essentially, ChatGPT is one specific example of this broader technology, being large language models. So how is it actually working? And this is where we're going right back to basics. And I think actually this is a good kind of conversation that you can, I've used these examples a lot with introducing AI, speaking to students and speaking to family members who don't get how it works. And when we're talking about the predictive side of it in particular, and how you can start to troubleshoot things like plagiarism, this understanding is really going to help. So if we look at the example on the screen there, what is the missing word in the sentence below? Is it likely to blank today? I'm wondering if I should pack my umbrella. I'm not going to ask you to put your answers in the chat, because that will skew this for anyone who's watching the recording back. But I would imagine that everyone is thinking rain when they see that gap. So why are we all thinking rain? Well, we're using the context to come up with that information. We know that it's something to do with taking an umbrella. We know that it's a form of weather that would require an umbrella. And the most commonly referenced weather that would require one to carry an umbrella is rain. Some of you might have gone out on a whim and thought of things like, is it likely to drizzle today? Is it likely to storm today? Probably we've gone for the most simple example, which is rain. And this is exactly how LLMs like ChatGPT are trained. So they're given huge banks of what we call training information. So this is essentially just presenting them with example after example of text and literature and conversations and information about things. And what they're doing with that information is using it to then predict the most likely response. So if we go back to the example of you've signed on to every because your password's gone missing and you're speaking to an LLM, there's a limited number of things that you're likely to ask it, which means that there's a limited number of responses it's likely to need to give. You're probably not signing on to every to ask it who you should place your bet on for the Grand National, say. So in that training data, it becomes quite predictable what it's likely to need to talk about. Same thing here, the context of umbrellas, a question, whether we can be quite predictable that the answer will be rain. So if I were to ask 100 different LLMs to fill in the blank here, they'd probably all give the same response. If we then ask the same question, but we move the blank, probably again, the word that's jumped into everyone's head is umbrella. And there's a couple of reasons for that. The obvious one is that I've just shown you the exact same statement where I provided the words umbrella. But we're also doing the same things in terms of drawing on context keys. So again, it's a question, it's to do with rain, it's something you would pack if there had been rain, if it was likely to rain. Umbrella probably you would take, particularly if you're in the UK and it's been raining today. There might be other answers. There might be wellies, there might be raincoats, there might be other things that you bring when it's raining, but umbrella is the one that you're most likely to pack rather than wear. So although we might have a lower probability of getting the same response, it's then sort of heightened by the fact that I'd already shown you that word before, so it was already in your head, if you like. And it's the same with LLMs. So in a single conversation with ChatGPT, if we've introduced it to a piece of information or a piece of context, and then we've asked it further follow-on questions, essentially that context we've already provided is polluting the conversation. That's probably the best word to use for it, because I think it captures really nicely that idea that that information is sticking around, it's not going anywhere. And this is really important when it comes to things like using ChatGPT or any sort of image generator to create a particular image. I've tied myself up in knots with this when I've asked it to create an image and said, I think the example that springs to mind, I'd asked it to put a megaphone in the image because I was doing an announcement for something. And then I asked it to move the megaphone around and in the end to remove the megaphone, and it just couldn't do it. It was so caught up on this idea that there had to be a megaphone in the image. When I asked it to take it away, it was still there. So then I thought, okay, we'll ask it to describe what it's seeing and maybe it can recognise, and it would say, oh yeah, there's no megaphone, or there is a megaphone, it's in the bottom left, when it wasn't there at all. So if you test this out with image generation, give it an idea and then ask it to remove that thing or to move that thing and see how much it struggles. And that is because of this context, contextual information polluting it within the same conversation. When you do start using ChatGPT to complete tasks, we'll talk a little bit later about how to do a really good job with this and how to get to the outcome you want more quickly. If you're really stuck and it has got hung up on something that you don't want it to do, just start a new conversation, scrap that context and begin again. So next example, the Titanic sank in blank. Again, probably we're all thinking 1912 when we see that. Some of us might be thinking the Atlantic Ocean. Some of us might be thinking in response to hitting an iceberg. Probably no one is thinking that, but most of us will have jumped to the Titanic sank in 1912. So we recognise that sentence structure. We recognise that it's probably a statement of fact. And the most common fact that we're given about the Titanic that would answer this is the year in which it sank. So this example is really good because this shows us how LLMs can almost look like a search engine. And you can see how if you were a pupil logging on to ChatGPT to get help with your homework and you asked it, when did the Titanic sink? And it said the Titanic sank in 1912. You would think it was working like Google. But what's really important to keep in mind here is it's predictions. It's not finding that information like a search engine. It's just predicting what's the most likely response. In the same way that it used the context keys around weather and umbrellas to predict rain or to predict umbrellas, all the information that it's been trained on has said that the most likely ending to a sentence that begins like this, that references the Titanic, that uses the preposition in halfway through, is probably going to be a year. It might be other things, but it's probably going to be a year. So we need our pupils to understand that these LLMs, are predicting. They're not finding information. And that's where we're likely to get unreliability. So if you're worried about plagiarism, which I think pretty much every teacher is, start here with this idea that they are only giving you the most predictable answer, not the correct one. And you will see mistakes creep in. So our first insight for LLMs when it comes to getting going with using them to build tasks, the more predictable an answer, the more likely you are to get the correct answer. So part of your challenge when you want to use AI to create a resource or to give you a new version of something, part of the challenge is around making the answer as predictable and as obvious as possible, and then you're much more likely to get the correct answer every time. So another example, missing word in this sentence, don't worry, his blank is worse than his bite. Probably everyone's thinking bark. This one's slightly different because this one's not so literal. We're basing this on like an idiom. If you were just basing this on facts, there are plenty of things that would be worse than his bite. Like, don't worry, his stabbing you with a knife is worse than his bite. But we would never actually say that. That sentence is rarely written down in literature. So that's why the LLM's not going to suggest that as a response. And it's understanding here that bark in this context is referring to something you would say, although we think bark dogs, is recognizing the idiom here. If we then gave it a different example, trees are covered in blank, which protects them from disease and helps keep out moisture from rain. Again, it's using the context of that sentence to come up with the idea that bark is the missing word. There might be other options, but the context draws us towards one particular thing, one particular response. So the same words can operate in different ways in different sentences based on the context around them. And again, that's part of what the training for LLMs is about doing, helping them to recognize that interest, another great example, has very different meanings when you're talking about interest rates to interest in something. So seeing these words used in sentences, again, makes predictable responses. So if we then asked it why bark is important to trees, its previous training data would help it draw on the idea of trees. When we talk about trees, we mean bark as in the stuff that grows on them. We don't mean the noise that a dog makes. And here are the reasons that I've been taught why bark is important. So this context is really key to being able to get the right responses. And because LLMs are being trained on volumes of information, literature that is full of context, that's why it can be so helpful for getting the response that you want. And particularly when we come to things like image generation. So my prompt here was generate an image of a futuristic city in the style of a Renaissance painter. And what's really great here is it's given the reasoning down at the bottom. So it's told me which elements of a Renaissance painter it's drawing on, but also what it's understood by futuristic city. So when you see the thought process there, that then helps you with refining or improving what it is that it's outputting. And you can start to see practical applications in lessons as well. So if you're wanting pupils to improve their description of a setting, can they write really good prompts that generate exactly the setting that they're imagining? And likewise, working backwards, if I were to show them this image, would they recognize that this is a futuristic city that makes use of Renaissance painting styles? If I was doing an art project on Salvador Dali and I presented them with this image, would they be able to recognize that I'd referenced Salvador Dali in my prompt? And again, we've got the explanation down at the bottom there. So we've got the melting skyscrapers, the gravity-defying structures. It doesn't directly mention the clock faces, but that's something that if you're familiar with Salvador Dali's work, you'll know appears quite a lot within them. So this, again, context here is helping us to generate the exact image that we want. So when it comes to image generation, talking about things like a futuristic dystopian style setting, a gothic looking house will really help in terms of getting exactly what you want. So our second insight ahead of starting to prompt, context is key, and LLMs are really great at using context to interpret text or requests and using that to inform their response. And we can use this both ways. We can use it to work forwards to get the images that we want, but we can also challenge our pupils to work backwards and see if they can extract from an image what the prompt might have been and how their language is shaping it. So we're going to go into a little more of the technical side now. So top level functions for this kind of technology. It's around summarizing, translating and transforming or expanding. Essentially, those are the only three things that are going on when you're using an LLM. So it is either summarizing something that's much more complex, telling you the key points of an essay it's read, or telling you the most important element of a research project, say. It's turning one thing into another, or it's taking something small and it's then expanding on it. At the bottom level, it's using what we call transformer technology. So we're going to go through this at a fairly rapid rate, and with my background being in English teaching, we're going to use metaphors along the way to help understand what that means. So transformer technology is the technology that has made this generation of LLMs possible. And it revolves around what we call neural nets and backpropagation. So at its simplest, that means we have an input. We input a prompt, we type an instruction for the AI, we share an image with it, we upload a PDF and we tell it what we want it to do with that PDF. And then it does its thing, and then we get an output at the other end. This bit in the middle, this idea of weights, we're going to come on to in just a second, but this is to do with how it's then sort of translating, if you like, that information from the input to get the output that you want. What's going on in the middle are all of these hidden layers. So it's not as simple as just, I told it to do this and now it did that. We wouldn't get nearly the level of complexity that we're getting with all the current models if that was all that was going on. So what's actually happening is something called forward propagation and then backward propagation. And the best metaphor I can think of to describe what is actually going on here. So imagine that you are stood in a room, and you might have done this as like a game on T-building exercises or in Girl Guides or something. I'm sure I've done it before. You're looking at a picture on the wall, or you're looking at a prompt, and you've got someone stood next door. They can't see the image that you're seeing, but you need them to recreate it. Forward propagation is essentially that process of, I've looked at it, I know what I want, I know what I need to see produced at the other end, so I need to tell that person. But imagine that you only have 30 seconds at a time to speak to them, or imagine that the only way that you can do it is by, the example our CEO was using earlier today is almost like punching holes in a wall, poking through bits of information and hoping that they can interpret that and get the thing that you want. I think it's easier to imagine that you are just running next door and you're in your 30 seconds saying, it's a house and it's on top of a hill and it's got trees growing either side and the sky's blue. You stop talking, they go and create what they think you meant. You look at it and you think, all right, there's some detail missing here. You run back next door and you look at all the things that they're missing and you remind yourselves of all the things that mean that what they've drawn isn't the same as the prompt that you were using. That's the back propagation. So this is this process, putting something in, getting something out, and the AI being able to sort of compare what it's done with what it was meant to do and go back and make corrections. And what it's doing in the middle, let's go back to this previous slides on weights that you can see on the left here. What it's doing in the middle is essentially judging what's really important in that prompt that it really needs to get right and what are the less important things. And it's using that weighting of information to generate the right output. So if you were to ask, if we were to go back to that drawing on the wall example, we know it's a house on top of a hill. It's not that important that the person trying to recreate it understands that in the bottom left corner, the grass is a little bit shorter than it is everywhere else. The really important things will be house, hill, trees, sky. Then we start to add in some of the details. They might have slightly lower weights. If we were looking at variation across, say, 10 different people trying to recreate the same picture, if we'd prompted properly, they would probably all have drawn houses on hills with trees. Some of them might have made the trees a bit bigger. You might see different variations of tree. You might have someone who's used context really well and said it's a Gothic house with 2 turrets and the front door is half open. Other people might have used slightly different terminology to describe it and not got quite the right picture. But that process of putting in just the right information and then correcting, going back and forth, that is essentially forward and back propagation. And that means that when we're then generating these outputs at the other end, there are certain things that, based on the information and the weights and the context, the AI or the LLM can be really sure that it's got it right. So in the example here, like the word it has the absolute highest probability of being correct in that context. And the other words or elements of that sentence or of that image, whatever it is you've asked it to create, will have varying, I guess, correct rates, for want of a better phrase, various confidence ratings for whether they're right or not. And any sort of variation that we see in outputs will be where maybe the weights are slightly lower. It wasn't as important that that thing be exactly as it was intended or described. So there's our full process. We input, we have this weighing up, this forwards and backwards as we correct and match it against what we wanted. Then we make the corrections to improve it, and then we go back, and then we get this output at the other end. And that is essentially what's going on under the hood with LLMs. ChatGPT is an example of a general purpose technology that is making it possible for us to do this process. So at its simplest, large language models are essentially taking any of these inputs on the left-hand side. We're training them on how to use that information, and then it's outputting the things on the right-hand side. It's following instructions, it's spotting objects. When it comes to something like AI marking, which is what we do at Stylus, take an example, object recognition, being able to interpret that these shapes that appeared on a page are in fact words and characters, and they're assembled into sentences. Being able to go and extract information. Has this people used commas accurately in complex sentences, so it can go and find that. So practical applications for this technology. This is the part where having the recording, I think, is going to be really helpful. So if we were in a classroom, I'd be saying, go and get signed onto your computer and we'll think of some tasks, and then you can have a go at doing them. Because we're not, and because you, I'm guessing, aren't in the room with other teachers as well, with the rest of your team. I think for this bit, I'm going to talk you through the strategies to do a really good job of this. And when you're then in teams thinking about how you might do this on a day-to-day basis, where this might be most impactful, we can use this to troubleshoot. And if it's not coming out quite as you intended, hopefully some of these tips will help you get the right output. So I'll go back to this point about understanding ChatGPT first of all. So I'd mentioned on here that you can access community created GPTs. A lot of teachers are now starting to use these to put resources out there that other teachers can use. So when you first sign in, you see there's the option to go and search for public GPTs. Go and have a look and see what else is out there. And a lot of people are sharing them on LinkedIn, sharing them on Twitter. This is going to sound really stupid, but when I very first joined the company, I don't think I'd signed into ChatGPT. And it is as simple as just type in ChatGPT and it's got single sign-on. So you can sign on with your Gmail, with your Outlook account, and then you're in. So there's nothing more complicated than that in terms of getting started. So if you wanted to build your own, what you're able to do there is to configure how you want it to look. So this is one that I've been mucking around on, Ms. G Teaches Grammar. So this was going to be an experienced English teacher focused on basic grammar improvement. The idea is if you're a student struggling to master grammar, you can sign into my GPT and it will give you some help. So how can I make my sentences clearer? Here's some advice from my chatbot, if you like. So configuring these is pretty straightforward. Once you're signed in, top left, there's a little, I think it's like a settings icon that you can click into, and that will take you to the option to browse through all the GPTs that are there. And I think it's in the top right of that screen is the option to create your own and then save it. But the first time that you sign in, actually, before we start talking about that, I need to tell you about our one. So at Stylus, we've gone and used ChatGPT to do some of our own process around this. So what we do is we're building GPTs, custom GPTs to help with AI marking. And that means we take work completed on paper by students. We get teachers to scan that work in and send it to us. We're then using this AI process that we've built to go through and mark that student work. We use humans to moderate it where we need to, And then we send feedback back to schools. So that could take the form of a teacher dashboard that tells you exactly where your class has gaps. It can take the form of what we call pupil upgrade packs, so actual printouts of work and feedback that pupils can work through, and then follow-up questions after that. Today is actually a really exciting day to be doing this first webinar, because we have just today had the press release go out to announce that we've now got funding to be able to roll this out with more schools. So our funding is meaning we can now start recruiting schools for projects across primary and secondary. I know we've got a good contingent of schools from primary signed up for the webinars already, who are already going to be working with us on our writing project, which is really exciting. We're working on Key Stage 3 and supporting Key Stage 3 transition with a focus on writing and literacy. And we're also working with Key Stage 4. English and science are currently live at the moment. Maths is expected sometime this term. And then we've got a moderation project as well that is all about making it easier and faster to sort of moderate questions across schools. So if you are interested in signing up for those, the funding has just come through, which means that this term we're able to work with a limited number of schools at no cost. So the QR code on the screen will take you to our website and you can have a look at what we're working on at the moment. And that is through building a much more complex and complicated version of what we're going to talk about now. So using ChatGPT to support your planning. These are the things we shared earlier, so things that it's really good at. It's great for summarising text, simplifying texts, taking things from a more challenging reading level. Say the reading age for text is 13, you can ask it to drop it to a reading age of maybe 10 or 11. Transcribing. Again, as a former English teacher, I literally used to sit there with books propped open in front of my computer, copying out passages if I couldn't find a PDF online so that I could use those extracts in lesson. What you can actually do is just take a picture on your phone, put the picture onto ChatGPT and say, can you transcribe that for me? And it will do it. And then it will it'll be there for you to just copy and paste into a Word document. Likewise, in meetings, you can get meeting note taker plugins so they can join all of your line management meetings or department meetings and just record, summarize, transcribe everything that's been said. Things like retrieval questions, gap fills is really good at that. Generating images to use as lesson prompts, providing simple explanations or definitions. So I've used it before with complex text and said, basically identify all of the more challenging vocabulary, make a list underneath, and then put a definition for each of those words. So if you're working from, say, your Key Stage 1, Key Stage 2 vocabulary lists, you could ask it to go and identify all the words from those vocabulary lists in a particular text, or look for them in an example of a student's piece of writing that they've submitted. And then turning one text type into another. So take this letter, turn it into an article, take this examiner's report and turn it into a student-friendly piece of writing. And role-playing as well. So this is another one that you see talked about online a lot. Getting ChatGPT to pretend to be Shakespeare so you can then ask it loads of questions about what happens in a particular play. So these are some examples of the practical time-saving tasks that we've tried ourselves. So I've mentioned the transcribing passages from a book for use in lesson. That would have been an absolute game changer for me, I think. Summarising examiner feedback, this one was great as well. So when you get your reports from the examiners about why they've made particular decisions or things that year on year students are doing well, rather than have to read every single one, you can literally just copy paste the lot, drop it into ChatGPT and say, can you summarise the most commonly referenced things that pupils do well and the most commonly referenced things that people struggle with? And then I've had it turn that into a student-friendly revision guide. So I've done this for GCSE, English language and literature. Just like, here's the top 10 tips from examiners over the last 5 years of how to do well in this exam. We talked about challenging vocabulary, the gap fill tasks it can do with and without multiple choice options. So you can do a sort of more or less scaffolded version, and also generating additional questions that follow a particular template. So if you've done a gap fill for one text, you can then just give it another text and say, do the same for this, and the same for this, and the same for this. If you've asked it to phrase a particular question, say it's a spelling test and you've set parameters for how you want the questions to be formed and what words they want to use, you could just say to it that you need like a term's worth of spelling tests using this particular list. And then generating images to use as prompts for writing is another one. And the heads up, again, it's not a search engine. So while you can ask it for information, you need to check it really closely to make sure it's correct. And there's a link here that you can use if you are ever talking about this with pupils. There's a lawyer who used ChatGPT to find case studies to reference in an actual criminal trial, and they turned out to be fake. It had made half of them up, and he didn't check. So he's now on trial himself. And the other one is that feedback is key. So treat it like a pupil, and if you don't get what you want the first time, persevere, go and rephrase what you're asking it for. So this is the part where if you're watching the recording back, I would be listening along in front of a computer while you're trying to create a resource or get it to do something that you think would be particularly useful. So first tip for getting what you want is to paint by exclusion. So think of this as like bringing in boundaries or creating a box around what it is that you want. The more you can rule out, the better the output's likely to be. That doesn't mean your prompts need to be massive, but you need to try and use your prompts or the thing that you're asking it to do to restrict what the output could be. Self-definition can be really helpful here. So an example will come up in just a second, but if we're painting by exclusion, couple of possible tasks you might ask GPT to do. So you might just ask it to write you a poem like a bit in Romeo and Juliet where he meets Juliet at the party, but make it about your partner who loves climbing in French movies. Or you might be super specific and say that the stanzas should each follow a different topic, and here are some specific facts that you might want it to include, and here is the form that you want it to take. Shakespearean sonnet is a great example of context that it will have been trained on. It will know Shakespearean sonnets will follow this particular structure. And then this asking for clarifying questions. So if you want to identify if you've missed something out, then you can ask the model. You give the request and then you say, do you have any clarifying questions? And it will find the holes, you answer the questions, and now your output is going to be much better. So let's say we were using similar kind of prompts, questions that it might need to ask. It might want you to specify, so this is the scene where Romeo and Juliet first meet at the party. Which bit are we talking about? The soliloquy when he first sees her? Or are we talking about the one where they actually speak to each other? What else do you want included? What do you want the tone to be? How long do you want it to be? And at that point we can specify it's a Shakespearean sonnet. Here's the information about my partner I want to see included. Advanced prompting. So this is going into more of the things that we're doing at the moment to get really effective, accurate marking for student work. So one shot versus multi-shot. This is actually another thing that the more you look at AI, the more you realise the skills teachers use are exactly the same skills that those working in AI need to have. So we'll be very familiar with the idea of chunking a task. And creating almost like a checklist of things, the steps for pupils to follow to get the outcome that you want. And it's exactly the same with prompting. So rather than just go and make me a table that shows how many of each of these different fruits were sold in Tesco this year, where there's lots of variation around how it might do it, because perhaps the LLM has seen many different versions of tables and is conflating those, we'll say first, write a list of this information, and we can check this information's right. Now write the reason, now display that in a table. So the more that you chunk it into steps, and that's literally using bullet points for each of the steps, the better your output's likely to be. Tree of thoughts is the next one. So this is, it's a great example on the board here. This is all about almost like reasoning. Being able to follow the reasoning that the AI is using. And the more you ask it, it's like metacognition in a way. The more that you ask it to think about how it's thinking or reasoning, the better the output you get. So come up with 5 solutions, now rank them, now expand on the best 2. here's the context I need, which one's best. We use this as a team when we're discussing decisions around the business. It would be a really useful thing to use if you had big decisions coming up in school, or as a department, or as a year group team. Quite often one of our team will come to the meeting and say, like, I worked it through with ChatGPT, and get it to challenge your thinking and say, what could be the problems with this? What are the reasons why this might fail? Argue the opposite and give me the reasons why it might succeed. And it really helps draw out your thinking, but also get you towards the output that you want. And then pseudocodes, I think, is the last one on this. Coding, I think, sometimes sounds like a really scary, techie computer science thing, but actually at its most basic, it's really simple. It's just like a decision-making tree. This is an example of how we're using pseudocode to mark student work. So if the student has written an irrelevant response, then award no marks. And this just basic if-then prompting is exactly how you get really good outputs. But it's also the kind of thing that pupils would be able to do as well. So if we want to start building up people's AI literacy, designing these really simple sort of decision-making flowcharts, if you like if this happens, then do that. If it doesn't happen, then do this. You're getting them to use AI skills without ever having to sit in front of a computer. And there's an example of one that we made earlier, Mr. Learn Cycle Bot. I've actually put a link in the chat to try our instant demo. So we've essentially built one of these to mark science, like an instant demo of some science questions. Doesn't matter if you get them right or wrong, because I think that the point with the demo is just to see what the AI does with that information. So if you head to apps, and then if you click on the links option, that will take you to our homepage. Just scroll down and pop your email in, and it will then give you those questions to work through. And you can see whether this is working or not. You can see it read handwriting. It's all handwritten, so you just need a bit of paper to write your responses on. And it'll be following a process like this to give feedback on your 3 questions. And if you're not a science teacher, feel free to go completely rogue and write nonsense and see how it handles it. There's also, if you are particularly technically minded, this slide's got a couple of links. So if you want to go and see Learn Cycle Bot in action, which is what the previous slide was describing, there's a sort of link in here. And prompt design and engineering, that's more complicated. So if you're really interested in how that works, I'll drop the slides in that same place in the links tray. And there is a link to a research paper that goes into it in more detail. So whole school considerations, this is our last section. And this is, if you want to start implementing AI a little bit more, if you've come back to the new academic year thinking it's time we all understood what it is, this is where I would recommend you start. This is the most important one of all. This is the what problem are you solving? So AI is not a thing that you just need to shoehorn in. Like I've seen reference to like AI needs to be a standing item on agenda, like SLT agendas, that kind of thing. It's not something that you have to just make work whatever way possible. It's just another tool. It's another way of improving systems. So first thing to think about is forget AI and computers. Like, where in your school are there stress points, pain points, challenges that teachers are facing? In a typical staff member's day, where is it they're losing time? Is it data entry? Is it because they're having to differentiate so much because they've got such a range of abilities within a particular class? Is it, like, quite often it will be things like behavior, which on its own might be manageable, but when you then have all the process that follows managing that behavior, becomes really burdensome. And when you then add that to the marking and the feedback and the letters that need to go out and the information that parents want and the making sure you're recording things all the time, this is where we can then start to think about, well, AI actually won't solve bad behavior in lesson, but there might be ways in which you can help it, I don't know, come up with a better way of recording behaviour points or generating letters to remind students, parents of rules and expectations. When you've got events coming up, it can just quickly write you a letter for that event. You can build your own GPT that is just for writing letters home to parents of pupils that attend your school. So start with the problem and then look for the AI tools that might address that problem, or might address some of the things around it, so that your staff have got actual in-person time to go and focus on the root problem. And we're starting with marking and feedback as the thing that we're trying to fix. Can we use AI to remove some of the time burden that comes with marking and feedback without also removing all the insight that you gain from student work? So then we think about who would benefit, and this is not just teaching staff. So your office staff, your LSAs, your pastoral teams, all of them might benefit from particular AI tools. So when you're running any sort of training, include everyone. Don't see this as just a thing that teachers go to, and make sure resources are being shared widely with a focus on the process. And what we mean by that is the process of, we're going to sit down as a group to try to design a method for making the writing of letters quicker, or we're going to use ChatGPT to help us come up with a better way of keeping and then disseminating minutes from our department meetings, say, or our year team meetings. So when you have that focus on the process, you can then get your sort of specific domain experts to adapt it for how they would need to use it. So once we've got a team that's maybe made up of someone from the office and someone from the pastoral team helping design letter templates, now everyone in the school can benefit from those. And you can also think about the benefits outside work too. So creating itineraries when you're on holiday, like, this is the time we've got, these are the trains we can take. How do we organise this trip? Where do we need to stop off? That kind of thing. So you're trying to remove time pressure from as many different areas as possible. Then we pick a focus area. So this is where I think working groups can be really, really useful. So say you're looking at creating close exercises, or say you've got loads of pupils coming to you with really low literacy levels, really low reading ages, and they can't access the texts that are being provided in lesson. You might form a working group that is all about finding the best AI tools to make text accessible across every area of the curriculum. And the more that you're bringing together different year group members, different subject leads, and getting them to think about where the challenges and the opportunities might be within their area, the more likely you'll get something that everyone can use, everyone can adopt, and that sticks. Definitely involve the SEND department, because there is so much opportunity here for supporting pupils with additional needs. And if you can get really, really good at doing one thing, and you have staff champions who are really, really good at that one thing, everyone then knows that next time someone says, "Oh, you're doing a trip next week, by the way, can you get the letters ready?" They know so-and-so in whatever department it is, they're the person who talks about that all the time. I'll go and get them to show me. Next thing is around opportunities to develop pupils' AI literacy. So there's no getting away from the fact that the world of work that our pupils are going to go into is becoming increasingly AI-led. I personally don't believe the people that say, like, there won't be any teachers or doctors in the future, like AI will have replaced them. I think we're always going to need human interaction. But the people who are the most successful and the workers who are most successful will be the ones who are able to wield AI as a tool to make them more efficient, to get things done quicker, to make complex tasks much simpler. And the earlier people start to develop those skills, the better. So some of those examples we've talked about today are really good ways of developing AI literacy. So that pseudocoding we talked about, and that decision-making processes and designing those, that's an AI skill. Being able to recreate the prompts that might have generated an image is an AI skill. Being able to input some text and get exactly the image that they want, like who can design the most Gothic looking house? Everyone has to come up with their prompt to design that Gothic looking house. That's another AI skill, being really specific in their prompting. Even that one I use as a metaphor for how forward and back propagation works. Here's an image, person next door can't see it, you need to describe it as well as you can. These are all AI skills that they're developing indirectly. I've linked at the end of this a Singapore article about how teachers in Singapore are using AI in lessons to almost avoid plagiarism by owning how pupils should be using it to support their learning. So talking to pupils about that, like, yes, you can go on ChatGPT and type in a your homework question, it'll give you a response so you can then just copy out or copy and paste. But here's why you wouldn't do that, and here's a place where that might be appropriate, and here's a place where, or a reason why that's really inappropriate, particularly around what we talked about with prediction. AI hallucinations are a really good hook. So this is where AI just makes things up. You ask it to create an image or to say what's in an image, and it just completely invents something. And it does do that every now and then. And that's a good starting point for why using it to do your homework isn't a great idea. So the bottom one, I think there is the most important. AI literacy does not need computer access, and it doesn't need technical knowledge. It's just at its most basic thinking, if I want this to happen, what do I need to put in, or what do I need to do to make it happen? Looking at decision-making processes. Involving parents. So AI images and filters are everywhere. Do parents know that? Do they understand the risks? Information evenings are a good start. So here's, introductions to parents around how AI is now starting to appear online, where their children might encounter it, and how you're using it in school, if you are using it at all. And you can emphasize the benefits, like it's unavoidable, but it shouldn't be a scary thing. It should be an empowering thing. I think it's in our next session, our final session, where we look at AI for students, we talk about the jump from not using calculators to using calculators, which feels so basic now, but had the same sort of level of, well, no one's going to understand maths if everyone's using calculators, that I think AI poses now. So we want to get ahead of that conversation and show, how we're making sure that it's being used really well. And that's what brings us on to safeguarding. So those top questions are around sort of your practicalities. Where are you going to allow it to be accessible? Which devices will be able to access ChatGPT? Will people be able to access it at all? Are we going to make them aware of its existence? Or are we going to avoid talking about it as much as possible? Do we need to update the online safety policy to include maybe assemblies or PSHE lessons that look at the risks posed by AI? Deepfakes being a great example. Again, in session 3 of the course, we look at that in much more detail. And that last part is quoted from a newsletter, which I think I've linked on the next slide. It's called Cognitive Resonance. It's absolutely brilliant, and it's looking at AI and LLMs through a cognitive science lens. And Benjamin Riley, the author, talks a lot about AI in education. I would say he's definitely not an AI optimist, but he's not a pessimist either. He's on the fence, reserving judgment. But I love this line about gifting students with offline spaces. So before we start shoehorning AI into everything we do, let's think about where are the opportunities for them to just read a book on paper, write on paper, not be in front of a computer at all. So that newsletter, Cognitive Resonance, that's linked on here. And I've put a few other resources that I found really helpful. So you've got the how schools in Singapore use ChatGPT. There's a teacher prompt library to help you get started. And then advice on prompting. I've put the Alex Quigley blog in there for balance, really, because I think we have to ask the question both ways. As much as tech can be really helpful, where can it also be a risk? And where might it distract us from really effective pedagogy? And a bit on AI hallucinations at the bottom, which, like I said, I think is a really nice hook for getting started. So if you haven't already signed up for session 2, the QR code there will take you straight to the registration page. So session 2, we're going to focus on whole school approaches. So we're going to do things like look at a scenario where a student has joined your school partway through the year. They haven't studied any of the stuff that the rest of the school have studied, and they've got, I think the example we've used is they've got quite low literacy levels as well, so they would really struggle with being given independent work to take home. All the different ways in which AI might help in that situation. We've looked at a couple of other whole school examples as well, and it's more focused on sort of systematizing. So you move away from individual teachers in their classrooms on ChatGPT on their own, finding ways of using it, towards a school that is really effective in looking at ways where AI might help and training staff and helping them to get the most from it. I think you'll get the link after this session as well to sign up, but the QR code will take you there, and it's also on our website. And finally, keep in touch. So our Twitter handles on the screen there. Dominic Bristow is our founder and director. He's on Twitter as well and on LinkedIn. I'm Hannah. I'm director of schools. If you are registered to any of our projects, you will be speaking to me at some point. I think there's a few of you on the call who I will in fact be speaking to on Monday. So get in touch. It's always really good to answer questions and talk to people and hear how it's working and what you're doing. And I think that is our final slide. So I haven't seen any questions come in, but if you have any, I'll stay online for a minute. Otherwise, thank you very much for joining. I hope that it's been a really good, positive first week back for those of you that are back in school this week. If I am speaking to you next week, I look forward to speaking to you next week, and I hope to see everybody in session 2 as well. Kate, I'll see you on Monday, and thank you, Simon. Thank you, Kate. So I'll end the session there, and you will get the recording in about 2 minutes' time.